What did I learn about fishing line after traveling to the Sunline plant in Japan? So not too long ago, I got to go all the way to Japan, and I was able to tour the Sunline factory. And after going through it, I did some videos while I was over there in Japan. And since I've come back, I've really had time to process this, talk to a lot of people about what I learned and what I did. So I wanted to break it down for you guys and tell you exactly what I learned about fishing line after touring that, and kind of processing everything that I learned. So first of all, the biggest thing, like one of the biggest takeaways, is that lines can have similar materials that they're made of. So like the part that goes into the line, the material that it's made of, can be identical, but the lines can act differently, totally different. And it's done by two different ways. One is how much the line is stretched. That can change the way the line acts. And then the coating that goes on the line can also make the line act differently. For example, this is some line that I snagged while I was in the Sunline factory that had just come out of the extruder. So I'll explain the entire process of how the line is made, like just in a Cliff Notes version here shortly. But it comes out of the extruder like this. I think this is, a diameter that's bigger, like this is maybe like 60-pound fluorocarbon. But you will see that after it comes out of the extruder, it can be stretched. So it is stretched in a very controlled way across a bunch of rollers. So these rollers, have put different amounts of tension and stretch this line differently. So it could take one line, stretch it very minimal, and then it has a ton more stretch in it, like this right here. It just keeps going and going and going. So it could go that, a lot further. And then it could have another section where it barely pulls it, and it's going to be that thick diameter, but that's gonna be able to continue to stretch. So how much you pre-stretch the line dictates how much stretch the line has afterwards. So a good example of that, and I'm very, very familiar with these two lines. This is Shooter and Sniper. It's kind of the two flagship fluorocarbons for Sunline. Sniper is the #1 seller because of the price point. Shooter's a little more expensive, but the material, it's a little better material. But they could make them to act almost identical and just have different materials. But they don't. The Shooter has very little stretch. So you could take 14-pound Shooter and 14-pound Sniper, take about 20 feet of line and pull them, and the Sniper is only going to pull and stretch maybe a couple feet at most. The Sniper will continue to stretch way back behind you. So they have a much different stretch rate, which to me is wild. It's wild to see, in person, in the flesh. So if you have Shooter and Sniper, or if you have like two different fluorocarbons that you fish with, I highly recommend taking about 20 feet of line, tying them to something that's solid, and then pulling those two lines so you can get a true feel for how much stretch each one of those lines have. So whatever, even if it's Seagar or whatever you are used to using, understand what your line does, and it'll help you understand how that line is. So that you could also mention the part about the coatings that make your line act differently. So once the line is stretched, it's kind of initially pre-stretched and to the diameter that they want it, and then it's kind of heated and cooled, and it really almost tempers the line, if you know what I mean. It doesn't really it'll allow it to continue to stretch and do its thing, but it's a process that they've refined over many years and lots of research. And that's the other thing that I was really kind of blown away by at Sunline is how much research. And I'm sure it goes to other manufacturers. Toray is one of the bigger manufacturers in Japan for fluorocarbon and monofilament lines. And Seaguar is a big manufacturer of lines. They're a big chemical company overall, but I'm sure they do tons of research as well. But Sunline has 11 full-time employees. All they do is research and development. And there were multiple of those 11 employees that had PhDs. I don't remember the exact number, but it was 2 or 3 at least of those employees that had PhDs. I mean, we're talking serious chemical engineering going on into making the lines that us Bubbas are getting to fish with. So I think that's pretty cool. That was the amount of research that they do and refining. Like, they're always testing the lines and different treatments and different things that they can do to the line to make them better, to make them smoother, to make them more castable, to make them more supple, to make them more abrasion resistant, all that kind of stuff. Pretty amazing the amount of research that goes into it. So one of the other big takeaways for me, big takeaway. I almost should have led with this, but this is, if you're still watching, you should get a good one out of this. 2 different braids, a 4 carrier and an 8 carrier. Those are the 2 most common braid types. And you can have the exact same materials and you have it in a 4-strand, it's a 4-strand braid or an 8-strand braid. And almost everybody, including myself, prior to my Sunline trip, I just thought the 8-line carrier braids were better. They were just going to be more, they were smoother, to the touch. They're a lot smoother. And I just thought that they were, quote unquote, a better grade of braided fishing line. That is not exactly the case. They are just different, and they need to be utilized as such. And I didn't really realize this until I was talking with one of the Japanese pros, Shunsuke Nomura, about what these are 2 of the lines he used. These are lines that they made for squid fishing. But one is a 4 carrier braid, one is an 8 carrier braid. He said that he uses the 4 carrier braid because he likes to use the smaller diameter, 8 or what's equivalent to 8 or 10 pound braid onto 8 or 10 pound fluorocarbon. And I was like, man, my experience with like 8 pound 8 carrier braids is that it's brittle. If you shock it or try to set the hook or put too much pressure on it, it'll break. 8 carrier braids are more brittle. They are much smoother, but they're more brittle. So they can break, in my opinion, easier. The 4 carrier braids are not as smooth, but when you go down to that smaller diameter, to what's equivalent to, say an 8 or a 10 pound diameter in the 4 carrier, they are really strong. They are not brittle. You can really put a lot of bang to it, like setting the hook, and they're not gonna have that brittle break that 8 carrier braids do have. And then when you have that smaller braid with the 4 carrier, that smaller braid is still very smooth. It still casts really well. So I can tell you, starting next year, I will be incorporating some 4 carrier braids into my fishing. The Shunsuke was telling me that he uses the 4 carrier braid most of the time on his drop shot, that smaller diameter, because that smaller diameter gets down quicker, gets down easier, and then you can put some heat on them, put some wood to them, and you're not so worried about the smoothness of the line because you're not making like super long casts. He said the only time he'll go to an 8 carrier braid is if it's real windy and he's still casting smaller lures. And I was like, all right, well, how much percentage wise, 4 carrier, 8 carrier, 50-50, 80. He said it was more than 50-50, the 4 carrier braid. He didn't give me a number. He's like more than 50-50. So I would say, 60-70%. He's using 4 carrier braid. And as of right now, I use 4 carrier braid 0%. And I think that's something that I'm missing in my lineup. So something I thought was very interesting. I learned. I'm gonna work on that, and I'm actually gonna go fish with these 2 squid lines because Sunline wanted our input. Myself and Kyle Welcher and Matt Pangerak wanted our input to see if we thought these 2 lines were worthy of being imported into the United States, and probably not marketed as squid line, but probably marketed as something that that would be used in the bass fishing world, and that was interesting. So the next thing is, as I mentioned earlier, before I go into the full explanation of the line, is the coating and the finishes are very important, and they change how the line is is done. So sniper and shooter, they're triple resin coated. So what that means is that the fluorocarbon comes through, and then it has a resin that goes on the outside of that line that helps make it smooth, that helps it be supple, there's a triple layer. So the triple layer allows that, so if the first or second layer wears off, there's still even a third layer below that. So it's triple layered, triple coated with that resin process, which makes, it's why Sunline is one, that sniper is one of the most popular lines. Shooter is also triple resin coated. So that is pretty amazing. The one other coating that they do have, which is on the Crank FC, and they're going to start incorporating it into other lines, is the X Plasma, or the plasma coating that goes on there. And for those of y'all who are not familiar, I was mildly familiar, so I don't claim to be the expert before I went over there. But plasma is the fourth state of matter. And traditionally, in order to create plasma, you have to have a super high temperature, very, very high. But Sunline has figured out that through a proprietary mix of gases, they can make plasma coating, which actually changes the molecular structure. Like the fishing line right here, when they plasma coat the fishing line, it actually changes the molecular structure on the outside of the fishing line, which they can make it repel water, or they can make it absorb water, depending on their treatment of gases. Completely fascinating, because they took pieces of matter that were not fishing line, and they coated it with this treatment, and you could pour water on it and watch the water just beat up, or you could pour water on it and you could watch it just go just get absorbed right into the material. Completely fascinating. I don't know exactly how it works, but I know that they have global patents on this plasma technology. So some of those lines, like X Plasma, like I was saying, the Crank FC has that plasma coating on it. That plasma coating repels the water, and it makes the line even more abrasion resistant. It's crazy how that water just comes off of there. But again, it's a treatment that goes over the outside of the line. It can wear off over time, but that is pretty wild. Oh, the one other thing I want to talk about, the resin coating that is on the sniper, the KVD line conditioner. That material is essentially what a lot of the resin coatings on most of the fishing lines. That's a very similar substance. So the KVD line conditioner, I've been using it for years. If you spool up your line with sniper or shooter, you don't need to spray KVD line conditioner on there right away. But if you use that line for a day and then let that line dry out, you can spray the KVD line conditioner on your line, and it will extend the life of your fluorocarbon, because it is essentially putting resin coating back on the line. I did not know that. I knew I'd liked KVD line conditioner. I think that's completely amazing and really, really cool. So that's another thing that I learned. Also, I really fully understood the entire process of how fluorocarbon and monofilament lines are made. So to kind of give you, I told you I was going to give you the Cliff Notes version later. Here it is, right here. So they have all these pellets. I did a whole video on walking you through the entire process, but I'm going to break it down for a little condensed version right now. If you can look up that video if you want to see more of what I'm talking about. But they take all these pellets, they put them in a hopper, and they melt them. They melt all these pellets, and then they push under pressure the melted pellets through an extrusion process. So it's pushed under pressure, and it comes out of a small hole, which they can control that diameter. It's pushed out of a small hole, then it is fed through the processing line. So it's extruded, it's cooled, and then it's brought back out and it's heated. And after it's heated the second time, it's in a very controlled environment going through all these spools. All these spools are under different amounts of tension, depending on what line it is. That tension pre-stretches the line. So then it's heated, stretched, and then it's cooled again, and then it's gone out. It's gone out and put on big spools. So it's pre-stretched to whatever tension they want. Put on these big spools. Once they get the big spools, then they actually test them. They test every single spool to make sure that it was stretched to the right diameter first, and then they check the tensile strength, the breaking strength on every one of these big spools that come off. They're huge spools, depending on the pound test, depending on how much line is on there. But they have these giant spools. They have these giant spools. They test that. Once they test, they check out okay. Then they go to the finishing room where they get that resin like I was talking about for the Sniper. Sniper gets triple resin coated. Some lines only get one resin coat. Some lines get the plasma coating. So they go through all of that resin coating. Then they put back onto big spools. Then those big spools are then put on smaller spools like that we would buy off the shelf or buy off the internet or wherever we buy our fishing line. And those are either individual bulk spools like the Sniper is, or they're put on with these type of spools. And the shooter is parallel wound. I've pulled line off and put back on and stuff right here, so it's not perfectly parallel. But you can see maybe on the underside how all that line is perfectly parallel, like it's gone. The line is put on one at a time and then pushed tight, and then it goes all the way to one side and then it goes all the way to the other, and that's what all the higher end monofilaments and fluorocarbons, that's the way that they're done. They're put on there so the line doesn't just haphazardly overlap itself and cut into itself, and it's put with exact amounts of tension on there so that it's not it doesn't cut into itself again. So I think it's just pretty wild. So once it's put in there, then it's put in a box and then put in a warehouse just like you'd imagine, and shipped to wherever you're going to buy it from. So I think the whole process was fascinating, and got to really see how that worked, got to see how it happened, and there it is. If you have any other questions about anything that I said, drop it down there in the comments. And yes, I voted earlier today. Filming this the week before I did the early voting, so went ahead and did my job as an American citizen, so I can explain to you how fishing line is made and all the cool stuff that I learned when I watched that whole process. So again, got any comments, got any questions, drop them down there in the comments. As always, I appreciate you guys watching, and we're going to show you more stuff and cool stuff here very soon.